This right here is an everyday spice, but it once bankrolled empires. It used to be buried with the dead, and strangely enough, it comes from the bark of a tree. In this episode of So Where's It From?, we're diving into the wild story of one of the world's oldest and most seductive spices, cinnamon. And here's the twist. What most of us call cinnamon, chances are it's not actually true cinnamon. To unravel this tale, I've got to mention China, India, Egypt, and this country right here. Because this spice doesn't just show up in a shaker jar. Before it gets to your kitchen, it's scraped, peeled, dried, rolled, and its history, absolutely wild. We're talking ancient Egyptians, colonial conquests, secretive Arab traders, and even mythical birds. To tell this story, I've come to the steamy lowlands of Sri Lanka, where I'll be meeting a family who've been farming cinnamon for 3 generations. This is Dianne.
Muscles very strong.
And her husband, Nalaka. In early 2025, Dianne taught herself English to start giving tours, and even got their farm listed on Google. Over the years, they've transformed their family plot into something pretty special. The day before our cinnamon tour, my buddy Munya and I go for a little explore in a tuk-tuk. We zip along the coastal roads between the towns of Habaradua and Ahangama, then eventually turn inland. Every so often, our driver, Wijaya, shouts, "Cinnamon!" But honestly, we have no idea what we're looking at. We make a quick stop at Dianne's farm to confirm the tour time. It's beautiful, lush, peaceful, but not quite what I expected. Imagine seeing rows of cinnamon sticks drying in the sun, maybe even piles of cinnamon powder, but there's none of that in sight. On the drive home, I couldn't help but think, what actually is cinnamon? How does it grow? And if it's not true cinnamon in my cupboard, what is it? So, cinnamon is a spice that comes from various tropical tree species.
Laurel family, Cinnamomum genus.
The powder, or sticks we see in stores, come from the inner bark of these trees. However, out of these tree species, only one of them is actually true cinnamon. The others have loads of different names and seem to be grouped as Cassia, but they're still sold as cinnamon, and it's actually what most of us have in our kitchens. I feel like I've been lied to my whole life. So let's get this straight. It's a spice that comes from the inner bark of a tree that we call cinnamon, but most of it is cassia. And apparently it's got something in it which can damage your liver. Great. The next morning, we head back to Dianne and Nalaka's farm. Within minutes of us arriving, Dianne leads us into a cinnamon grove just steps from her front door and starts handing us leaves to chew on.
What the hell?
Crazy, like candy.
Where's my candy?
The flavor is surprisingly sweet, like that cinnamon chewing gum I had as a kid. Before I can even process it all, Dianne's already moving on. She's crushing up leaves to release their oils. Wow. Showing us cinnamon berries, pointing to freshly cut stumps, and even has us biting on twigs.
Yes, bark. Cinnamon bark.
Woo, there we go, spicy. We're in total awe, blown away by the smells, textures, and tastes. Without her realizing, she's built up this quiet suspense because we're excited, but still a bit confused as to how cinnamon is harvested. Moments later, she pieces it all together. So, these are cinnamon trees. They thrive in rich, well-drained soil with plenty of humidity and direct sunlight. In other words, this corner of Sri Lanka is perfect. Farming cinnamon often begins with planting seeds or cuttings. After around 2 years, the trees mature and you get your first harvest. By the time this happens, you also get stunning pinkish leaves, which, according to Dianne, make great peacock food. The trees also flower and give you a sort of berry, but we're here for the bark, or what lies just beneath it. Once ready to harvest, the cinnamon stems are coppiced, leaving a stump that eventually sprouts new shoots. What you've cut and taken away looks like a giant cinnamon stick, but we're still a long way from the powder you'd sprinkle on your porridge. Next comes the processing, which involves some serious skill. Right, let's just take a moment because we now know how cinnamon grows, but we still don't know where it originally comes from and who first started using it. Today, cinnamon is farmed in dozens of countries, but the biggest producers always seem to be China, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka. According to the FAO, in 2023, these countries produced 98% of the world's cinnamon. Now this really does make sense because cinnamon is actually native to all 4 of these countries. Remember when I mentioned cinnamon comes from many tree species? Well, each of these countries has its own species, but only Sri Lanka is home to true cinnamon, or Ceylon cinnamon. More on that later.
Who used cinnamon first? Well, we don't exactly know, but
The earliest reference to cinnamon seems to come from this guy, Shen Nong, aka the Divine Farmer, a legendary Chinese emperor from around 2800 BCE. His teachings were compiled into a book, and it has a whole section on cinnamon, mentioning that it can do things like alleviate cramping, improve blood circulation, and my favorite, grant spiritual clarity. Sounds great. The ancient Egyptians also used cinnamon for medicinal reasons and when they buried their dead. In India, it's included a bunch of times in Ayurvedic texts, and in the Old Testament, you've got both cinnamon and cassia being mentioned.
in short, Cinnamon's story is utterly incredible, and we're only just getting started. But before we dive into all of that,
We still need to find out how it's processed. Processing cinnamon is anything but simple. Once the cinnamon stems are cut, knots and side branches are sliced off to smooth them out.
Next step is to take this brilliantly sharp crescent-shaped tool to take off the first and second layers of bark until we've gotten rid of that green and it reveals this wonderfully sandy yellow color.
This inner bark is then gently softened with a brass rod before it's expertly sliced and peeled off using what looks like a butter knife.
And that is the first time since we've got here that I see cinnamon that I would recognize.
The peeled inner bark is then sun-dried until it naturally curls into the familiar cinnamon quill shape. We're not done yet though, because these quills are then stuffed with broken pieces of the inner bark, wrapped up and trimmed to 21 inches. The bundled cinnamon sticks are then dried for another 10 days and eventually sold to exporters, who grade the cinnamon based on things like thickness and color. The highest grade pays up to $22 a kilo, which really isn't very much given all this work.
so long before the cinnamon industry became what it is today, this spice had been tempting traders and baffling historians for a very long time.
By around 700 BCE, cinnamon had made it to the Mediterranean. A lot of Asia was already in on the cinnamon game, but Europeans had no idea where it came from. Spice traders would keep the source a secret, leading to some wild origin stories. One of them from Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote that cinnamon comes from a faraway land, but is gathered in Arabia by giant cinnamon birds, called the cynomolgus, who build nests out of cinnamon sticks.
Even Aristotle wrote about the cynomolgus, and for over 1,000 years, Europeans believed this tale.
By the 1400s, Europe was loving all these foreign goods and spices, especially cinnamon. The problem was that it was traded through the Middle East, and people really didn't like that.
No thank you.
Europeans wanted control, so driven by spices' golden glory, what began is the age of European colonization.
At this point, I've got to emphasize just how insane the European spice trade was. It was horrendous and changed the course of history in so many ways. Sri Lanka and cinnamon is just one part of that story, and it's an important part.
In the 1500s, the Portuguese finally figured out that cinnamon came from Sri Lanka, and so began their colonization. Then came the Dutch, who forced out the Portuguese and introduced a cinnamon monopoly. They exploited Sri Lankans' industrialized farming and even burned surplus cinnamon to up the prices. Last up was Britain, who were brutal. They took over, brought in more cinnamon regulations, and ramped up the exploitation. In 1948, Sri Lanka finally gained independence and was able to regain control of their native Ceylon cinnamon, or true cinnamon, which is what Nalaka and Dianne farm today.
Nowadays, cinnamon is in almost every kitchen cabinet, perhaps because it works equally well in both sweet and savoury dishes.
In Sri Lanka, it's in everything from curries and cocktails to sweets and sambals. But the one dish that I kept on going back to was beetroot poriyal, made with a yummy combo of onions, coconut, mustard seeds, beetroot, and freshly ground Ceylon cinnamon. In Iran, they've got this dish called kuku sabzi, a kind of herby, cinnamony frittata. It's made with eggs, onion, plenty of herbs, and a healthy dose of cinnamon.
This last dish comes from my grandmother. She used to make this incredible cinnamon tart, so I got my mother to dig out her recipe.
It consists of 2 layers of homemade cinnamon pastry with jam between the layers. It's then baked in moderate oven, as my grandma writes, and the result is so tasty. In Sri Lanka, when we wrapped up our cinnamon session with Dianne and Nalaka, we didn't have time for beetroot porridge or cinnamon tart, but we did get to try cinnamon tea, made with their homegrown, very own, true Ceylon cinnamon. Now, with all these cinnamon snacks and this spicy history, there's still one lingering question.
What actually makes true cinnamon true?
To put it simply, one of the botanical names for Ceylon cinnamon is Cinnamomum verum. Verum means true in Latin. European botanists just chose this name hundreds of years ago, which is a bit sneaky because it implies the other cinnamon species are non-verum or non-true. The cinnamomum part comes from the ancient Greek cinnamomum, which could trace back to ancient Hebrew and even further back to the Malay language.
Does the name really matter? Well, yes, if you care about flavour, fair trade, and your health.
Different cinnamons taste different. Cassia cinnamon tends to be more intense and spicier, whilst true cinnamon is sweet, floral, and delicate. Cassia is also way cheaper to produce, so we mostly get that on our shelves and it's just labelled cinnamon. Fortunately, in Europe at least, things have got to be labelled properly, because Ceylon cinnamon now has protected geographical indication, the same recognition that sets champagne apart from sparkling wine.
To make things more complicated, cinnamon contains a chemical called coumarin, and in high doses, it can damage your liver.
According to the European Food Safety Authority, Cassia has up to 30 times more coumarin than Ceylon cinnamon, but you'd have to eat a teaspoon of Cassia a day for many weeks for it to actually be an issue. In making this episode, I've learned that choosing cinnamon is down to preference and what you're using it for. Many dessert recipes favour Ceylon or true cinnamon, whilst many savoury recipes suggest Cassia. Realistically, it's also what you've got access to, because we're not all lucky enough to have the choice of cinnamon varieties.
So, where is cinnamon from? Well, if you've made it this far, you'll know it's a spice with many tales.
It's from southern Chinese forests and Indian medical texts. It's from ancient Egyptian tombs and Arab traders who kept secrets. It's from the nests of mythical birds, and most importantly, in this story at least, it's from Sri Lanka. Grown, peeled, sun-dried and bundled by families like Nalaka and Dianne's.
So, next time you open up your spice cabinet or wander down that spice aisle, perhaps you'll look at cinnamon a little differently.